Exodus 32. Jesus. Verse 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." He delivered us from Egypt. We don't know what happened to him, so we're just going to abandon him. Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters were wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol, cast into the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Boy, they forgot within a matter of minutes. They said, "As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, who was led by God," and a few verses later, "Hey, these gold things that you make into a calf, that's what led you out of Egypt." How quickly we forget what God has done for us. That's why I said a few weeks ago, it's good to write things down, prophetic words. Write things down that God has done for you. Write things down that you've seen him do. Write things down that when he does prophetic things that he's said to you, that write it down that they were done. And write down things that he shows you. Write these things down. Go back, refresh yourself, remind yourself what he's done. Remember I told you Bill Johnson, he on a continual basis has his book, and he goes back and he reads through the prophetic words and the things that God has done for him and through him to refresh and to build his spirit up, build his faith up, right? It's important because how quickly we forget what God has done for us, right? Verse 5, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol, cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.'" So we see in verse 1 that Moses was delayed. When the people saw that Moses was long in coming down from the mountain, he was delayed, right? They thought that he was supposed to be there in a certain time, right? He was a long time in coming down, and they turned because things didn't happen in the order of the time that they thought they should happen. And when they didn't wait on God, they turned and tried to do things themselves. When they didn't wait on the man of God to come down from the mountain in God's time, for things to happen in God's time, they turned, right? And they did things on their own. They tried to make things happen themselves. He was only delayed in the eyes of man. The people had an expectation of the time in which he was to return. I want to tell you, don't get caught up in what you think the timing of God should be. You wait on Him. Sometimes He doesn't reveal the timing. Sometimes He doesn't reveal how quickly He's going to do a thing. And just because in a prophetic word you hear, this will happen soon, to God, soon is not necessarily tomorrow. I remember hearing somebody who, this was years ago, so I don't remember all the exact words, but I remember hearing somebody that moved in the prophetic say something about the different words like soon, quickly, that type of thing. And they actually explained what the different ones spiritually meant, that like soon was probably going to be, this isn't what they exactly said, but I'm just giving you an instance. Soon was like 3 to 5 years, and quickly was actually like 6 to 12 months or something like that. And to God, what our quickly and soon mean isn't to Him what quickly and soon mean. And so we give up on Him because it didn't happen in our quickly time, but in God's quickly time, it will happen because it has to, because His word will not return void. What He says will accomplish what it's supposed to do. Expectation. They had an expectation of the time in which He was to return. Expectation is how you think it should go. But expectancy is a posture. Expectancy is a posture. We need to wait with expectancy. And that when it doesn't happen in the time that we expect, that we're still going to wait in expectancy that He's going to do what He said He's going to do, no matter how long it takes, in this age or the age to come. See, we've got to get that thing of the eternal mindedness in us, right? Remember, I shared a few weeks ago, it's been a few weeks, that I saw, I think it was, I always want to say Jackie Chan, Francis Chan. I always want to call him Jackie Chan, I don't know why. So Francis Chan had this rope, and I don't know, it was probably like 100 foot long. And the first like maybe foot, 6 inches or foot, was wrapped in like black or red tape. And he said, this is your life. That's eternity. Right? You could also, I remember, I think it was in Experiencing God, they talked about how the life in the womb compared to your life outside the womb. When you're in the womb, you think that's the world. You don't, it seems so long in there, but then you're thrust into life in this world outside the womb. You forget what happened in the womb, even though it seemed like forever to come out of there. You forget what happened there, and you live your life here. And we get into eternity, it's going to be like that. We're probably not going to remember a lot of what we did here, but what happened in the womb set you up for out here. And what you're doing here is setting you up for what's going to come in eternity. We've got to get that understanding that we're not just here to just slide by and slide into heaven by the skin of our teeth. We are preparing and setting up for ourselves treasures in heaven. God wouldn't tell you that He is building a mansion for you there, somewhere to live, if it didn't matter. You're just going to slide in. I'm just going to barely get in. No, what we are doing here is going to matter in eternity. And so we've got to begin to understand that and realize that in Hebrews 11, it talks about how faith speaks, the faith of the great men of God, the great faith people of the Old Testament, how even though they were gone, their faith still mattered. It still spoke. It still was active. And we've got to realize that things don't end when we are gone from here. So we wait in expectancy. Are you going to wait on God with expectancy or rely on your own expectations? Are you going to wait on God with expectancy that even though He doesn't show you past the next step, He doesn't show us everything, are you going to wait with expectancy or rely on your own expectations? When your expectations aren't met, are you going to worship and wait on God, or are you going to go somewhere else and fill that void? And you see that in the church a lot, where people, they give up on God. We didn't get to listen to the whole thing. I want to go back and listen to it, because occasionally I listen to this sermon that my dad taught. And we listened to a bit of it going through the mountains over to the Redwood Forest when we were in Bethel. And in that sermon, he talks about how how my dad had people who left the church and they told him, you preach on healing and you preach on healing and you preach on healing, and I don't see it. So I'm leaving. I'm not going to hear it anymore. And my dad says, I'm going to preach healing till the day I die. If I don't see it, then my son's going to preach it. And if he doesn't see it in his lifetime, his sons are going to preach it till it comes, because it's truth. It's the Word of God. And it's not our timing. It's people have left because they don't see God do what they expect, instead of waiting in a posture of expectation or expectancy that God, I'm just going to love you, like this song sang this morning. God, I'm just going to come before you. I'm not looking for blessings. I'm not looking for you to do anything in me. I'm not looking for this. I'm not looking for that. I'm just coming because I love you and I want to be intimate with you and I want to love on you and cherish you and lift you up and exalt you. And it's amazing what He'll do when you just do that. And you quit trying to get Him to do something and just come to Him. I can tell you, your spouse, if the only thing you do is come to your spouse and ask, and I need this, and I need this, and I need this, your spouse is going to get tired, because they just want to spend time with you. They just want you to love on them, and you love them back, and just talk, and right? That's what God's looking for. When your expectations aren't met, are you going to worship and wait on God, or are you going to go somewhere else to fill that void? We are all created to worship something, and when our expectations aren't met, we tend to shift our worship to something rather than someone. What do you do in that moment when your expectations aren't being met? Determines where your worship is. What you do in the moment where your expectations aren't being met will determine where your worship is. Do you turn to God and worship Him, or do you worship something else? That'll tell you where your heart really is. Luke 8:40. Says, on the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting on Him, waiting for Him. Or NIV, that was NLT. NIV says, now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed Him, for they were all expecting Him. And if you continue to read there, that's actually where the woman with the issue of blood was healed. And there was a number of healings right there. They were waiting with expectation for Jesus to come to them. That's what we have to get in that posture. God, I just love you and I worship you, and I'm just waiting for you. I'm just waiting on you. Jesus, come. Jesus, come. I worship you. I exalt you. You're high and lifted up. You're train that fills the temple. Right? Isaiah 40:31. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. So if we wait on him, our strength is actually renewed. If we wait on him, our strength is actually renewed. Isaiah 59:19 says, when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Lord raises up a standard. I think the New King James Version says, so shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west and his glory from the rising of the sun. When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will lift up a standard against him. So when the enemy comes in and we wait on the Lord, we wait in expectancy, and the enemy comes in, the Lord actually raises up a standard. So the standard right now is right here. But when the enemy comes in and begins to flood you and overtake you, the Lord actually raises up a standard. The standard now becomes here. The enemy's still under your feet. And then when the enemy comes in a little bit more, the Lord actually raises up a standard again. But see, it's about waiting on him. It's about waiting on expectancy that he's going to do what he said he's going to do. That his word will never return void. And that when the enemy comes in and tries to flood your mind with doubt, with fear, with anxiety, the things that was prayed about this morning and rebuked, when the enemy comes in and tries to flood your mind, the Lord actually raises up a standard. And he puts all those things under your feet. And it doesn't matter how much the enemy floods in. If you'll wait on him, if you'll have expectancy on him, that he's going to do what he says he's going to do, and you worship him instead of going somewhere else and worshiping something, but your heart is actually on him and what he can do for you, he'll raise up, I don't want to break it, he'll raise up the standard. He'll raise up the standard. But here's the deal. When he raises up the standard, you can't wallow. You can't get back into it. Don't fall for that. Don't end up waist deep in the flooding anxiety, fear, and all that of the enemy. Worship him and raise with the standard. He will lift you up. He'll take you from mountaintop to mountaintop. If you keep your posture right, the Lord will raise a standard against the enemy. If you keep your posture right. It's all about keeping our posture in an expectancy. God, you said this, your word says this, I'm going to stand on your word, and as you stand on his word, you're standing on the rock, which then goes up in the standard when the standard's raised. Your gaze, hope, and faith being on the one that raises the standard. Your gaze, your hope, and your faith being on the one that raises the standard. And I would say your expectancy.